Alright, so by now you have a little sense of the interface. You've got this little sphere sitting on your screen and you've rotated it around and moved it around. Got a sense of how to just move this thing around. So now what we got to look at, and what's the very next thing to focus on, is the grammar of sculpting inside of ZBrush. The nuts and bolts, just the sculpting system, or more specifically, because that's quite a broad topic, is the brush system. Okay, so what you have to know is up here in the corner we've got all of these brushes, and that is a lot of brushes. But you're only going to use a few of these, and I'm only going to show you 2 or 3 in the course of this this demonstration, because you don't need all of them. They're for more advanced things, but in the basic sense, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to kind of outline the ones that are really relevant. You're going to want to know about clay buildup, okay, clay tubes, maybe. You're going to want to know about move, alright, and in fact probably one of the most important brushes here is move. You're going to want to know about standard. Alright, and what you might notice is that all the brushes that I'm outlining, they all have a special outline. So smooth is in there. That one we'll know about, but you rarely select it. I'll show you another way that you select that. But magnify, layer, elastic, displace, these are all considered major brushes. So let's select one of these brushes. Or actually, you know what? Let me set you up with what is really the primary and one of the real fundamental elements to know about the brush system. Okay, and this is technical, but this is the kind of thing that is important for you to learn. Now you can learn how to push the buttons, but if you don't know this next piece of information I'm going to give you, then you're missing out. The standard brush is considered a standard within the ZBrush brush system, but the next one is the clay brush. Okay, this is ZBrush 2. The standard brush is ZBrush 2. The clay brush is ZBrush 3. Alright, I was there when this brush was invented, and I have to say, I didn't treat it that well in the beginning. So if you don't understand the clay brush, that's fine. You know, in fact, let me tell you a little story, because the clay brush was there, and you know, I have daily meetings with development, and I'm trying this brush out, I'm trying that brush out, and at that point, people were largely talking about this flatten brush, which if you're new to ZBrush, you'll realize they never talk about now. But they were largely talking about flatten brush, so I was like, guys, the clay brush is basically a flattened brush that doesn't work. What's the purpose of the clay brush? What's the use of this? And every day I kept harping this, or not every day, every week. I kept harping this and kept talking about, come on, we got to fix this flatten brush. You know, people are really wanting to make these flat surfaces. All right. Eventually, what they did is they created the trim dynamic brush, and that is one of the best flattened brushes you'll ever see. All right. But before that, okay, they just had the clay brush, and you know, it took me forever to try to understand what that was all about. But then the dev team told me about a couple of settings that they thought were good, all right? And so I tried those settings out and created the clay tubes brush. So the clay tubes brush was really one of the most important brushes for people building up and using this clay sculpting process or workflow. But there's something really important that I haven't told you about here. Okay, there's one thing that is the key difference between these two brushes, the standard brush and clay brush, which includes build-up and clay tubes. Okay, and that is topology. Alright, now the standard brush is fine with all quads. Okay? So that means that the topology is basically a grid. Okay, there's not a lot of cases where things are triangles and broken up into pieces, and it all makes sense. Okay, it's not like what I've just done. It is instead grids like you're seeing right now. And that's fine. But in order for ZBrush to evolve, they needed something different. They needed something that could take scan data, for example. Or they needed something that could take these new meshes that were being created by Shadowbox and that you'll see are created by Dynamesh. They needed some brush that could grow with them, with all these ideas that they were having, because they were thinking about mesh extraction and Dynamesh and all these things you're going to learn about. They were thinking about that stuff long before it ever made it into ZBrush. I remember meetings about that stuff long before it ever made it into ZBrush. It was on the table being discussed. Okay, but they needed a brush that could handle it. And the clay brush is independent of topology. Independent. How can I spell? It doesn't matter what the topology is. It doesn't matter if it's triangles, if it's quads, if it's n-gons, if it's a mess of triangles going into quads, going into a mess of triangles. It does not care. It is topology independent. And when that brush was developed, when that algorithm was developed, then it opened the doors for Shadowbox, for Dynamesh, for a whole bunch of the stuff. The curved tubes, those things could not exist without the clay brush as a functioning part of this whole system. So you've got these two choices. Okay, this is number 1 and this is number 1. They're both the first choices that you need to think about when you get in there and you get into sculpting. So let's look at this real quick. Okay, you've got the standard brush right now. If you click on the surface, you're going to get something. Okay? If you press Alt, you're going to push in and you're going to get something. But now let's go in and say, take the clay brush. Alright, I'll explain all the stuff I'm doing right now in a moment. It's doing a similar thing. Okay, I'm pressing Alt, I'm increasing my draw size. But what you'll notice about the clay brush is that it very naturally works with the surface regardless of what's happening. So let me just push in. I'm pressing Alt right now, and you can see we're naturally getting a little bit of a flat surface. Try to do that with the standard brush, and that's not going to happen in the exact same way. Okay, I'm going to press Alt and build up and build up and build up, and then press Alt and cut in and try to cut that in, and then it goes a little nuts. And then I'm going to add, and then I'm going to subtract, and then I'm going to add, and then I'm going to subtract. And you see the mess. Okay? It doesn't keep things independent of topology. As the topology changes, the standard brush is affected and influenced by it negatively. It's still hugely important. But that's one of the really important things for you to understand, and I've spent a little bit of extra time here, but I really want you to know that the brush system has this fundamental divide between the standard brush and the clay brush. And it's not just the clay brush, okay? But if you hover over the clay brush and then you look down at the bottom, well, you can't see it now, not with my screen drawing program. But you see down towards the bottom left, it says clay 3. That's the hotkey I've assigned to it. It says base type equals clay. Come in here to clay buildup, base type, clay. Clay tubes, base type, clay. Right? Come in here to flatten, and you're like, oh, well, that's a different base type. Okay, but then come all the way down here to rake. That's a clay brush. What else is a clay brush? Well, the planer brushes. What? How's that work, right? There are a lot of clay brushes and different brush types that you want to be aware of and you want to be thinking about, okay? The base type is basically the algorithm that's being used. But each algorithm, the standard brush and all of that, they have different presets and hence, different brushes. So, with that done and said, let's backtrack from this. This is a little more theoretical. Let's backtrack from this and let's look at just the tools that you need and just the grammar that you need to get started.